Hello guys. So today we'll be learning what is meant by Docker and all the types of Docker and components of Docker's architecture. So let's begin by learning what is meant by Docker. So simply explaining, Docker is like a simple container management service. It is a Linux-based open source containerization platform, and we use to build, run, and manage packages, applications for deployment of containers. Uh, there are several advantages for using of Docker, like simplicity, collaboration, flexibility. So there are components of Docker are images, containers, registers, and Docker engine. Images are like the blueprints containing the instructions for creating a Docker container. So they are like rough layouts for the Docker containers. They are made up of multiple layers. Um, there are four layers, namely, mm, the first one is a base layer, which is generally made up of Linux-based OS kernels. Second layer is the software files. Third's the dependencies, and fourth the configurations, which are introduced to, which are embedded into them by the command programmer. Second are the containers. They are the live instances of the images. Running images can also be assumed as an container. Registers. A Docker registry is like a repository of images. So it keeps track of all the images which are present in a Docker. The default is a registry is the Docker Hub, the public registry, and anybody can access it. Docker Engine is a core components of Docker architecture, and it's the main responsible uh, component of a Docker system. The Docker engine uses a client-server architecture and uh, is responsible for running all the images and containers correctly. So before starting, before getting to know what is Docker, we should, have a clarity about virtualization concepts. So keeping virtualization concepts in mind, we can see the following differences between a container and a virtual machine. So, basically, VMs are high has a component called hypervisor. It's the main component in a VM. Uh, each VM can have its own operating system, and hypervisor is based on the hardware infrastructure which the cloud server provides. But in a container, uh, there can only be one OS, but the Docker can run multiple containers using multiple dependencies. There is high level of utilization of resources in VMs. It is high on memory demand, and boot up also takes time in VMs. But unlike VMs, containers have minimum usage of memory. Their medium usage of resources, and the boot up is much faster. Now, to run a Docker software, there are multiple ways for multiple operating systems. But us being beginners, we will run Docker on Linux-based operating system so that the concept is clear to us. For that, there are two ways now. First is to install an Ubuntu software onto your laptop or PC, but that may require additional efforts and time, and maybe your system may or may not support uh, two OSs at the same time. The another way is to install an Ubuntu into a virtual machine and run Docker on the virtual OS. That can be done by the following steps. So first, go to Oracle VirtualBox, open the first link, and click here to download the VirtualBox. Next step is to go to Ubuntu, open the first link, go to download and download the latest version of Ubuntu desktop. I've already downloaded that ISO file, so I'll directly go to the Oracle virtual machine box, virtual box, and open a new file. Here, name this as Ubuntu. Search for the location where you have downloaded the ISO file. File here. Click on next. Allocate about 3 GB of memory. This is your RAM. This should be sufficient enough. Click next. You can uh, keep this settings as it is. Click on create. Click on next. Dynamically, it asks you for a dynamically allocated hard disk availability. Keep it as dynamically allocated. Click on next. Provide it with a certain space like 10 GB. It's the default. Click create. Click on start. Now select the file where you have downloaded the ISO file. For me it's in the downloads. Choose start. Click enter. After installing Ubuntu into the virtual machine, first we have to check whether there are any older versions of Docker running on the Ubuntu. Check that we have to run this command first. Upon confirming that there are no other older versions of Docker running, you shall run the following commands to install Docker into our Ubuntu system. This is how we install Docker into a virtual machine loaded with the Ubuntu software. Thank you.